Sometimes, to keep things interesting, superheroes just have to lose everything that makes them super. But don't worry, they usually bounce back. As Marvel's golden boy, Captain America has been through quite a bit. He stepped in and out of the Captain America mantle, but in Captain America Volume 7, issue number 21, he actually fully lost the super soldier serum. In that issue, the villain Iron Nail had gained control of a giant helicarrier mech called Gungnir, and was using it to attack and destroy the city of Norwezvekistan. I hope I got that right. Steve Rogers had managed to infiltrate the mech and was confronting Iron Nail inside. Now, look, Iron Nail's name may be kinda lame, which is a rhyme, but Ren Shen has a very unique power. Thanks to the blessing of the Nian, Iron Nail has a hole in his chest that 1. Allows him to turn into a humanoid dragon, which is cool, but 2. He can produce these terrifying tentacles and darts that, when used against Captain America, were able to pull the super soldier serum right out of his body. This caused Steve Rogers to be depowered, and on top of that, it rapidly aged Cap, leaving him incredibly weakened. On the plus side though, Cap still won, throwing his shield into Gungnir's core, and with the help of the Falcon, he defeated Iron Nail and escaped the mech. From Marvel's golden boy to DC's, the Man of Steel is a massive powerhouse, but funnily enough, he's actually lost those powers a whole heck of a lot of times. For today though, I'm gonna talk about the follow-up to a story I've mentioned a bunch of times, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. In that story, the 5th dimensional imp, Mr. Mix, actually goes bad for once and engineers a plot that leaves Jimmy Olsen, Lana Lang, and even Crypto the dog in the grave. For those crimes, Superman uses the Phantom Zone projector to capture the imp, but thanks to some poor luck, Mr. Mix is actually pulled apart between 2 different dimensions, ending the life of the villain. Superman takes this hard, purposely exposing himself to gold kryptonite, which completely takes away his powers. But even that isn't enough, and as Clark, he walks out into the Arctic wasteland to end his own life, and it presumably happens too, since he still hasn't come back when the story fast forwards 10 years into the future. Fans of X-Men 97 will be familiar with the 2nd episode, Mutant Liberation Begins, which actually saw Storm losing her powers after she was hit with a blaster that fired concentrated radiation beams from the villain known as the Executioner. This led into a story arc with the Mutant Forge, who actually created the blaster that took her powers. Now, fans of the comics know that this arc is actually an adaptation of 1984's Chris Claremont written and Barry Windsor Smith drawn Life, Death, A Love Story. The show actually does a pretty good job at adapting the story, with Storm being attacked by Henry Gyrick wielding a blaster that strips her of her powers. She's then taken in by Forge, who recently lost some of his limbs, and the 2 bond over their respective losses. The comic story actually gets pretty dark, but the 2 find love in each other before it's revealed that Forge created the blaster. In the comics, she would eventually decide to rejoin the X-Men even without her powers, and she beats Cyclops for leadership of the team, and after a good chunk of time, and largely thanks to Forge, she does actually gain her powers back. Now, some heroes have superpowers and use them all the time, but other superheroes have powers and seemingly forget about them entirely, meaning that when they lose those powers, it doesn't really matter. And for DC's Black Canary, that has been the case a few times, like for example in the Longbow Hunters, which was arguably one of the character's lowest points. Black Canary ended up being incredibly traumatized by the villains of the story, to the point that she not only couldn't have a child, but also lost her canary cry. That story is another example of fridging, where a comic book writer, in this case Mike Grell, uses the suffering of a female character to spur on the male character's heroism. But this moment, and any other time that Dina lost her powers, only proved to show just how capable she is without them. That's because Black Canary is also an incredibly capable hand-to-hand martial artist, and she often uses her martial arts skills in place of her powers to get the job done just as effectively. Next up is the Green Lanterns. Unsurprisingly, there are many times that Green Lanterns have lost their rings or just lost their powers, and they almost always manage to find a way back. One of the most awesome times this happened actually belongs to one of the most awesome Green Lanterns, John Stewart. John has lost his power multiple times. For example, when Hal Jordan as Parallax destroyed the central power battery and John became a member of the Dark Stars. But in Justice League Volume 4, number 4, during an attack by the Legion of Doom, John Stewart's power ring was completely destroyed in a fight with Sinestro, who then infused John with the ultraviolet light of the invisible spectrum. John was bonded to the ultraviolet light on the cellular level, but being a complete and utter badass, John was able to overcome Umbrax's influence through sheer power of his own will, and he then used his will to turn his UV lantern ring into a Green Lantern tattoo, burning it right into his finger. John's body literally became his power ring, and his heart became his power battery. Danny Rand, the Iron Fist, is an incredibly powerful hero, largely thanks to the Iron Fist itself, which Danny gained after defeating the dragon Shao Lao, which he managed to do without that power. So obviously Danny Rand is incredibly capable as a martial artist without it, which is good because these days he doesn't actually have that power anymore. During an incredibly tough fight, Danny gave the power of Shao Lao to Okoye, meaning the power of the Iron Fist returned to the dragon's heart. This turns Danny into just a regular guy who is also incredibly experienced with his totally normal fists. Danny completely embraced this though, and now he's serving as the mentor for the new Iron Fist, Lin Lei, while also funding a ton of superhero activity and beating up bad guys anyways with his fists. Danny Rand is pretty awesome. Many heroes gain their powers from specific items, meaning that when that item is not being used, they don't have their powers. It's an easy way for these heroes to be put in a tough position, or, in the case of Dr. Fate, it's a way for them to actually have a bit of relief. In All-Star Squadron, Kent Nelson, arguably the most famous Dr. Fate, went through a period where he nerfed his own powers, choosing to forego the Helmet of Fate in exchange for a non-magical half mask and using only the Cloak of Destiny and the Amulet of Anubis. He eventually revealed that the reason he chose to do this was actually pretty dark. It turns out that Nabu, who basically possesses the Helmet of Fate and other artifacts, actually also possesses or tries really hard to possess whoever is wearing the Helmet of Fate, taking control of another person entirely. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be dealing with that either. Wolverine has two main things going for him: his healing factor and his adamantium claws, and both have been taken away multiple times to give Wolverine some more hurdles to overcome. In the 1993 crossover event Fatal Attractions, Magneto was offering mutant sanctuary on his ship, the Avalon, and recovering from the legacy virus he was planning to completely wipe out humanity, being opposed by the X-Men. It was during that fight that Magneto loses his cool and strips the adamantium right off of Wolverine's bones, deeply scarring the feisty little mutant. But there have been a few times where Wolverine loses his healing factor, but for this point, I'll tell you about the aptly named Killable story arc, where Wolverine's healing factor is taken away during a S.H.I.E.L.D. rescue mission. Wolverine was infected with a microverse virus that shut down his healing factor, and that virus began spreading across the globe. With the help of S.H.I.E.L.D., Wolverine was able to stop the virus, but it still left him unhealable and led directly to the death of Wolverine arc. The Flash got his powers thanks to what was originally a complete accident. A lightning bolt happened to strike the lab where Barry Allen was working, interacting with a very specific set of chemicals to give the Flash his connection to the Speed Force and turning him into the superhero we know and love. But fast forward to the Flashpoint storyline, and thanks to Barry using the Speed Force to go back in time and prevent the passing of his own mom, which is totally understandable, he accidentally created a branched timeline where sure, his mom lived, but he also never gained his powers, and the world was pretty topsy-turvy. The story was actually really cool and kind of pivotal for the DC continuity as a whole. There was also this scene where Barry, alongside this universe's Batman, tried to give Barry back his super speed powers by repeatedly trying to recreate the accident that granted them in the first place, meaning Barry subjected himself to being struck by lightning over and over again until it thankfully actually worked. And last up today, we could talk about individual Marvel mutants losing their powers like Wolverine and Storm, or we could talk about the time that 986,618 mutants all lost their powers at once, resulting in a good chunk of those mutants also losing their lives. During the climax of the House of M storyline, where the Scarlet Witch lost control of her sanity and changed all of reality, Magneto took the life of Quicksilver, and this sent Wanda Maximoff even further into insanity. Wanda resurrected her brother, and in a rage, rage over the fact that her father had always cared more about mutant kind than his own children, the Scarlet Witch cast a spell using 3 little words and robbed almost 1,000,000 mutants of their X gene all at once, leaving roughly less than 200 known mutants in the entire world.
Thor's arc where he lost his hammer might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. Big statement, I know, but it led to the god becoming more secure in himself than he ever was, ultimately leading to him becoming even more powerful at the end of the day. Thor had harbored a secret belief that Gore the God Butcher was right, that the gods deserved to go because they were selfish and didn't care about mortals. But since he didn't let himself focus on that belief, it was more like a pesky back cupboard thought, it didn't really affect him or his ability to hold his hammer. Well, it didn't affect him until somebody else said it. Nick Fury learned from the Watcher that Thor held this quiet belief and whispered the confirmation to Thor, leading to the start of a pretty epic hero's journey of self-discovery and learning to love and trust yourself. Jane Foster took Thor's place, kind of until, Thor had sorted himself out again and believed he was worthy enough to hold the hammer. Eventually, in War of the Realms 6, Thor realizes that the hammer doesn't make the Thor makes the hammer, and he's back in action. Scott Summers temporarily lost his optic blast, but it taught him, and us, a lot about the kind of man he is. Despite losing his main mutant power in Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, Issue 14, Scott Summers barely let it affect him and proved he is still not someone to be trifled with, optic blasts or not. He continued being the team's fearless leader, creating effective combat strategies, and even almost sacrificing himself to give the team a chance at winning. He was captured and tortured and never gave in to the enemy's whims. Eventually, in issue 23, Scott's powers are reactivated, but by that point it had been thoroughly established that Scott is as powerful and respected, powered up or powerless. Zatanna's greatest strength is also kind of her greatest weakness. If you're the best of the best, there has to be something that brings you back down to earth. That's kind of the rule, it seems. And in Zatanna's case, she is one of the most powerful magic wielders alive, but she has to speak her spells so they're as focused as possible. So if you tape her mouth shut, or in the violent mind of the Joker, shoot her neck, it's all over. She has to rely on herself to win the fight. Luckily though, she, like many others on this list, has trained for that. She honed her combat skills with her father and the JLA. Of course, Zatanna did in fact lose her magic once. In 7 Soldiers, Zatanna, a spell gone wrong caused her to lose confidence and with that her magical abilities. After training her own apprentice, she was able to gain both of those things back. Batman never really had any superpowers except, a strong body and money in the bank, but he did lose both of those things after the incident where Bane broke his back. Right now, just so we're all on the same page, I'm personally thinking of the Dark Knight trilogy, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Bruce was literally stripped of everything that made him who he was. He lost his strength, his sanity, his city, his good name. He pretty much was nothing in that moment. Having your spine snapped in half does an equal amount of damage to your mind as it does the body, but he came back after that experience stronger than ever. He overcame his self-inflicted mental blocks in that epic cave climbing scene, and that is a confidence that you can't shake. Despite losing the power of the Iron Fist, Daniel Rand just doesn't stop. Once possessing mystical, spiritual energy, Daniel Rand was practically unstoppable. His natural strength, speed, reflexes, and more, they were all enhanced by this. Plus, he became really good at just adapting to any environment he found himself fighting in. Hyper aware of his surroundings, he can hear everything and sense before an enemy strikes. He was also able to connect his consciousness to another person and focus his energy into healing at a rapid pace. As a man, he is a master martial artist and acrobat. In order to win a fight, Daniel did give up his powers once, but then he just happened to not be able to get them back, and this was a big adjustment for him, but he took it in stride, and when the new Iron Fist came along, Daniel ended up training them. Rand also helped Luke Cage defeat some Spider Slayers, and then helped Shang-Chi take on a fleet of tanks in the grand final battle. What a guy. Superman is known for being the strongest pillar of hope out there, and yet a certain rock just seems to hold an annoying amount of power over him. At first, when kryptonite was rare, Superman could kind of get away with not training for crypto incapacitation, but now it seems like everyone and their dog has access to it, so Superman definitely needed to start training for when his superpowers inevitably get stripped from him mid-fight. Thankfully, he is best friends with Batman, one of the greatest non-superpowered fighters out there, and also Wonder Woman, who is also just as good without power as she is with it. Superman put in the work so that he can at least hold his own and effectively take down enemies, even famously training with Muhammad Ali. Black Cat was gifted with the unfortunate, or fortunate, depends who you ask, power of bad luck. Not for her, but for anyone around her. This power can help in her favor. Her enemies have an invisible force working against them, like 2 against 1. However, if she wants to get close to anyone and strengthen her personal life, too bad. Maybe people won't correlate their sudden inescapable bad luck with her directly, but subconsciously I'd like to think that you'd realize and end up distancing yourself, which does happen often with her. Felicia Hardy lost her powers in Peter Parker The Spectacular Spider-Man 115. She had, of course, Hex Spider-Man with bad luck to the point where he had to go get Doctor Strange's help to get it removed. Peter was just trying to get his bad luck removed, but Strange was concerned that the removal would affect the source. At this point, Black Cat and Spider-Man were really going through it, so Peter didn't really care about that. Of course, Strange's spell did affect the source. Peter ended up fine, but Black Cat, who was in the middle of a fight, got a bit of a shock when she was suddenly more evenly matched. The thing is, she was only thrown off for a second before she realized that she didn't need to pull her punches anymore. She defeated a handful of guys and then continued as Black Cat. It turns out her depowerment gave her other cat powers, like seeing in the dark among other things, which she would have never discovered without depowering first. Wonder Woman is up next because she is that girl. With or without powers, I would rather go into a permanent coma than face off against Wonder Woman, and I think many other people would agree with me. Wonder Woman has been divinely empowered, so she is extra strong and can fly and more, right? But that's just the start. All her skills like martial arts and combat training and weaponry, she developed those. She trained to be the best there is. So sure, you can take away her God-given powers, but you're still left with someone who could throw you clear across the room. Back in the late 60s, so this is like Earth 1 Diana Prince, she did actually give up her powers. The Amazons had to leave Earth because they exhausted their magic and they had to go renew it. But Diana wanted to stay on Earth with Steve Trevor, so she willingly gave up her powers. Crime stops for no one, and soon she is needed to defeat Dr. Cyber amongst a series of other villains. She trains with talented martial artist I Ching, and together the two take down some of Cyber's henchmen and a bunch of other people. She lost her powers in Wonder Woman 179, and I'm pretty sure she didn't get them back until issue 204, which is quite a long time. New Earth Supergirl does not come to play and has trained for the day someone strips her of her powers, as shown in Supergirl, who is Superwoman. Supergirl is fighting Reactron and is doing well, but mid-battle he opens up a part of his suit containing gold kryptonite. Gold kryptonite halts her from accessing her superpowers for at least 15 seconds, which isn't great, but luckily she prepared for this moment. To Reactron's shock and surprise, Supergirl isn't as defenseless as he'd hoped. She actually smacks him around with a metal pole. Obviously, he's confused, and so Supergirl explains with the iconic line, "I trained with Batman, with the Amazons, just because I can't use heat vision doesn't mean I'm helpless." Love her for that. Too many times we've seen some crypto incapacitate our supers, and it's just a little nice change. Spider-Man lost his famous spider sense in Amazing Spider-Man 654, and it actually affected him in wildly unexpected ways. Things that Peter never even thought the spider sense would affect, he learned the hard way that it did. Like when he shoots webs. Normally Peter can swing around town, no problem, he knows exactly where to web to get a good grip, but it turns out that Peter's intellect isn't the reason for perfect placement, it was because of his spidey sense. A couple issues after losing the sense, Peter literally falls from the sky, which does shake him a bit mentally. This is the kind of power Peter didn't even realize he falls back on, so when he is fighting Master, Peter ends up psyching himself out mid-battle, wondering if he's always been so good at what he does because he is good, or because his spider sense has always had his back. How good is he really without it? It's only a moment's hesitation, but it's enough to get him shot. Overall, it's a really interesting look at Spider-Man that forces Peter to strengthen his other abilities. Spider-Man and Peter had to adjust to the change. He also gets a really cool new suit, so you can't complain there. Eventually, the spider sense returns, but it was cool seeing Peter adjust.
At number 10, we have Hit Girl from the Image comic series Kick-Ass. Although she's basically a child, Hit Girl is already an extremely impressive fighter, having been trained in martial arts since she was basically an infant. Adept in weapons training with guns, hand-to-hand combat, and tactical strategy, Hit Girl doesn't stop at anything to take her enemies out of the equation. And considering she has almost no problem taking down full-sized adults as an actual child, there is no question in my mind that she needs to be on this list. The only reason why she isn't at a higher tier is that, well, we all know that there are just plenty of other hard hitters in the running. Okay, coming in at number 9, we've got Black Widow. Black Widow is one of the most impressive superheroes that gets all of her power from martial arts and weapons training alone. Sometimes being accused of being too OP in the MCU for her power set, this highly trained assassin trains hard for her impressive fighting abilities. She has a long history, beginning in the 60s, and has shown that some people are just more skilled than others at holding on to their martial arts training. Black Widow is even credited with having taken down the likes of Spider-Man in the past, which says a lot, and she's even somehow contended with Iron Man in one instance, which is only one of many examples of why she deserved a spot on this list. At number 8 is the Punisher. One word: guns. The Punisher has gotten so good with guns that he doesn't need much more than a couple of pistols and a stone cold heart to take control over his enemies. To be fair, Frank Castle doesn't really deal with enemies much beyond the world of street crime in the human world, but he's still had his fair share of run-ins with superheroes and held his own. In fact, he's credited with taking down Batman himself and even Wolverine at one point. Although to be fair, Wolverine is in pretty dire straits at the time and Frank has access to a steamroller. But still, the Punisher is very seldom at the mercy of anyone, and it's pretty impressive that he's just a human who uses nothing but weaponry and cold hard confidence to get things done. At number 7 is Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing. Nightwing is the first sidekick that Batman ever had, which makes him the longest standing disciple of Batman. And considering Batman is arguably one of the kings of non-superpowered heroes, this says a lot. Having grown up by Bruce Wayne's side for all that time, Nightwing has seen tons of combat and has learned a lot about making efficient use of weapon and gadget loadouts in high-stakes situations. This training gives him enough skill and confidence to go out into the world under his own moniker of Nightwing and make a major name for himself. Being the current leader of the Teen Titans, Dick Grayson already has tons of experience for such a young hero and stands out among other heroes that also have the advantage of actual powers under their belts. At number 6 we have Green Arrow. Now this was a toss up between Green Arrow and Hawkeye, but I only had room for one bow and arrow guy on this list. Now for someone who doesn't actually have any powers and just relies on his skill set as an archer, Green Arrow is extremely impressive. It seems as well that he doesn't even need to equip himself with much defensive gear because his offensive skill is so OP that he can just overwhelm his opponents before they can get a hit in. I mean, he can shoot 33 arrows a minute. That's basically like shooting an extremely high caliber machine gun with perfect accuracy. And he also has a huge array of trick arrows that he can switch out without hesitating, like his exploding tip arrows, which pack a huge punch to his attack strength. And if his enemies can somehow protect themselves from that, he also has a great stealth stat, which allows him to slip away into the shadows to reassess his next approach. He's just one of the more impressive heroes without powers out there, and I wanted to make sure he got his due credit. At number 5 we have Daredevil. Daredevil gets a spot higher up on the list because on top of not having any powers, he's famously as blind as a bat. Now you may be eager to contest this one because it's been said that Daredevil does have heightened senses due to his run-in with toxic waste, but it's never been confirmed that his senses are heightened because of the chemicals or simply as a natural response to his loss of eyesight. But either way, he can't see, for crying out loud, so if you wanted to argue that being able to hear and feel things really accurately is considered an advantage when you can't even see, then you can go ahead, but I don't know if I'd agree with you. The truth is, what would normally be seen as a shortcoming by anyone else actually becomes one of the hero's primary motivators to try that much harder at what he does. And not to mention, he's first introduced as a skilled lawyer defending the likes of Namor with his quick wit and cunning. And those abilities always count to some degree as well on a list ranked by power. At number 4 we have Cyborg. Sometimes heroes are endowed with supercharged upgrades which are basically synonymous with actual powers. One example of that is with Cyborg, who after losing some of his body parts is given massive bionic upgrades. There are a multitude of different offensive and defensive features to his robotic suit, or whatever you'd call it. Is it a suit? Because it makes up part of his face. Either way, even just his laser cannon is enough to have him fit in with the other heroes, but ever since he's been outfitted with the boom tube, he's only climbed higher in the ranks. Not to mention his white noise cannon and the mother box more recently. The boom tube, first of all, adds teleportation to his arsenal, the white noise cannon can rip enemies apart instantly, and the mother box gives him access to the multiverse, which brings Cyborg to a whole other level. And considering he's only human somewhere beneath all that tech and armor, it just makes him that much more impressive. At number 3 we have the one and only Captain America. Okay, don't kill me, you may disagree with me on this one, and I'm open to a discussion in the comments, but it's simply the truth that Captain America, and Bucky Barnes for that matter, doesn't actually have superpowers. When they are tested on and given their powers by the super soldier serum, they are only given increases in strength, durability, and fighting skill at the peak of human ability, meaning they are still entirely human and are not actually known to be superhuman, just extremely efficient humans. And as insanely powerful and awesome as these heroes are, don't want to bash them in any way, I just don't think that being extremely efficient humans constitutes having superpowers. Now, I know that some powers are acquired through circumstance, like by falling into a barrel of toxic waste or being, I don't know, bitten by a radioactive spider, but the super soldier serum just simply doesn't give Steve Rogers superhuman powers, just peak human performance. And honestly, I'm not complaining. That's enough for me. At number 2, we have Batman. Bruce Wayne is the perfect example to demonstrate that a good person who is very motivated, dedicated, and, oh yeah, has billions of dollars at their disposal can basically make someone superpowered. I mean, do I even have to convince you that Batman deserves one of the top spots on a list about non-superpowered heroes? Other than being a master detective and tactical genius, Bruce Wayne has trained hard enough to be considered one of the most skilled and agile fighters in the DC universe as well. Matching this up with his unprecedented arsenal of gadgets, vehicles, and weaponry, Batman becomes unstoppable. And it's sometimes easy to forget that under the mask is someone just like us who simply took advantage of his privilege in a way that almost no other superhero has ever done. Almost. Which brings us to number 1, with the one and only Iron Man. Iron Man has got to be one of the coolest superheroes out there, and he doesn't have any powers. I know you know this, I'm just saying it, reminding myself and everyone out there. Taking the concept of a medieval suit of armor and modernizing it to the point that Tony Stark does is one of the coolest and most effective ways I've ever seen a hero go from mortal to superpowered being ever. With only a genius mind and, yeah, a couple million, billion, trillion bucks, I don't know how he affords all that stuff, Iron Man has no issue keeping up with nearly any superhero. And that includes beings from other dimensions with powers incomprehensible to even the most superpowered beings out there. With his genius AI system, extremely durable metals, and adeptly engineered mechanics, the Iron Man armor is born. And it's such an impressive feat that even those with little to no training in hand-to-hand or weapons combat can be put into one of these suits and keep up with the likes of the Avengers, i.e. Pepper Potts in the MCU, which I don't know if that was very believable, but that maybe the suit is just that crazy. There's just no question that Iron Man would be at number 1 on this list, and as one of my top 3 superheroes of all time, it's just that much cooler to me that he's just a person. Tony Stark didn't wait on a barrel of toxic waste or a radioactive spider to come his way. He took on the challenge of turning himself into a superhero, and he succeeded on a cosmic level.